Good morning. Yeah, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you today and talk about the 60-day, 1,600-mile solo bike trip that I did from Minnesota to Maine when I was in my early 60s. I crossed parts of 6 states, southern Canada, and I want to talk today about how that experience changed my life and redirected me towards becoming a full-time caregiver who was consumed and losing hope, and to where I am today, and how that bike trip changed that. I retired early from Augsburg University to become a full-time caregiver for a loved one who was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. And after a few years of 24/7 caregiving duties, I was worn out. I ended up with heart failure in an emergency room, and the doctor said, "We're going to do open heart surgery on you." I guess they asked me, but they said this is what I had to have. I was not expecting this. I thought I was in pretty good shape. I took care of myself. And as often happens with caregivers, you get worn down and you don't know it. And this happened to me. I wasn't taking care of myself. Upon discharge from the hospital, the nurse who interviewed me on the exit said, "Tracy, what are you going to do different so you don't end up back here?" She said, "I've been here a long time and I see people that come in, have heart surgery, end up coming back, and sometimes don't survive. What are you going to do differently?" You know, I was totally puzzled by what she said. I really didn't have a clue what she was talking about. I didn't see the cause and effect from caregiving. And even though I left there that day puzzled, there was a seed planted in me that I got a message from her. And it changed things. I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do, but following that, I went back to caregiving full-time, and the job got harder. It was one that it's hard to describe. People say, well, why do caregivers wear down? And I think what it is, I was used to being in community service. All my life, I was good at it. On the school board, on the church board, in the fire department, the ambulance crew, in the legislature, in the military. My life was all about service. The difference was I always did that with a team of people. As a caregiver, now it was just me. And I was wearing out and I didn't know it. And I ended up a little bit sicker yet, having had the surgery. After a few more years of caregiving, you begin to take over all the duties. As a 24/7 caregiver, I was doing the driving. I went from the normal work I was doing to taking care of everything in the house 24/7. I thought I was losing basically who I was, and I think I did lose a part of who I was, and I didn't know it. The kids came to me again, only this time they were a little more serious. They said, we want to help you out, and we want you to take time off. I'd lost weight. I was, I totally cut myself off from people in my life and everything that I had done, and I had become a caregiver. And I was a good caregiver. I did a good job at that. Maybe too good. I needed to tip the scale here a little bit. And they said, "What do you want to do if we give you this time off?" And I said, I've always kind of dreamed of a solo bike trip to Maine. And the kids were just kind of taken back by this. They said, you're kind of old for that. You had heart surgery. Where would you stay? You've never done anything like this before. We're worried that we might lose you, Dad. And my comment back was, you know, you're going to lose me if I don't do this. People ask me, why did you do the bike trip? And I think instinctively, there's a survival mode in all of us. And for me, it was, I have to do this. I had a son who lived out there. I've always been a wanderer. I've always been someone who kind of did things a little bit different. And my son and I had a little struggle, and there was a certain amount of separation there that bothered me. And I knew that the bike trip would be something that could somehow shift within me this hole that I had dug myself into. I needed something extreme. I'm kind of an extreme person. The bike trip, to me, was an instinctive desire to live. And live I did on this trip. The first experience that was the most moving to me was I had gotten lost someplace in Wisconsin. I had my map out and I was sitting at an intersection. And someone pulled the car up next to me and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I'm lost." And she said, "Well, where are you headed?" I said, "Wisconsin Rapids." And she said, "You just came from up that hill. You just came down that hill on the way to Wisconsin Rapids. You need to go back that way." And as was the case all along the trip, by going out like I did, I engaged people. Here was this older gentleman on his bicycle with panniers bulging out with all my gear, and people wanted to talk to me. People wanted to hear my story. And so the young woman who was with her father, who was kind of slumped over in the seat and didn't look very, very healthy, she said, "I'm just bringing my dad back from the hospital. He had open heart surgery." And I said, "You know, I had that not so long ago." And the father, who was sitting there like pale and looking very vulnerable, I could relate to that. That's how I felt when I had open heart surgery. When he heard that I was doing a bike trip, he sat up in his seat, straight up. I think the color came back to his face, but there was a brightness in his eyes. And he said, "You mean to tell me you can do a cross-country bike trip after you have heart surgery at your age?" And I said, "You bet I can. I'm doing it." And that was the kinds of connections that time and time again I had on this trip. Every day there was some kind of interaction between myself and the people that I ran into along the way. And what happened through that was I got reconnected, I got re-socialized, and I think one of the most important things I learned from that was that my story is important. My story can help other people. And not only that, other people's stories can help me. And it was the kind of interaction that I was used to all my life. That's what I grew up with in a small town. We kind of helped one another. The next exchange that I just want to mention was I'd gone into a small town cafe in Michigan. And I walked in with my gear, you know, clicking on the floor with my shoes, and I probably even had my helmet on, I don't know. And this was a small town cafe, and the woman who was running the cafe looked at me and said, "Who in the world are you, and what are you doing here?" I mean, everybody else in there kind of looked normal, and to have this person set their bike outside their cafe and walk in like I did, took me back to my roots in a small town where we had these characters there that confronted you. And I knew right away when she asked that question, I felt like I was home there. And she said to me, she talked to me for a while about the trip. She said, "I'd like to go over and sit in the corner over there, and I'd like you to spend a little time here this morning." This was the kind of engagement that I got all along on this trip. And what she wanted to do was for me to share my story with people in that cafe. And I did that. I went in at 7:30 for breakfast. I left there at 12:30. with an egg salad sandwich she had packed for me, some potato chips and a drink, and said, "Have a nice trip." The next experience that was memorable and was a connection I want to share with you was when I came up to the Canadian border, when I was crossing into Ontario. I wondered, am I going to have to unpack all my bags and go through a whole bunch of stuff? And the woman who, on the U.S. side, said to me, she wanted to hear my story. And so I told her, and she said, "Why don't you put your bike in the back of my pickup, and I'll take you across the border." We got across the other side to the Canadian Customs, and she started telling them my story. And the agent said, "Let me help you take your bike out." Instead of checking everything, he helped me take my bike out, didn't check my papers, didn't check my bags, and said, "Have a nice trip." And to me, that was the kinds of connections that I experienced all along on this trip. At 10 miles an hour, going down a rural country road, things happen to you that you can't experience at 60 miles an hour sitting in an air-conditioned car going down the road. What I found was that connection that I so desperately needed, that I had lost in caregiving. I realized that for me, and I think most of us, we want to be connected to the people we're around. You know, it's kind of the way I was raised, but I think it's not just me. I think it's something we all kind of need to connect with one another. And when asked to do this TEDx talk, I was nervous. I didn't know if I wanted to share this all. But this is a part of connection. I get to hear other people's stories. It's like the bike trip almost. You know, it just feels really good to me. When I crossed the mountains of Vermont, which was something I was really concerned about. I had left early so that I could be in shape by the time I hit the mountains. And going up that side of the mountain, 1 or 2 miles an hour, sometimes I had to actually get off my bike and push it. And you know what? That wasn't so bad. It was like things went a little bit slower. I got a chance to see a little more of what was around me, the beauty of Vermont. But coming up and going over the other side and coming down, I think I was probably going 35 miles an hour. With all of this gear, I never felt so vulnerable. And yet I felt alive. I don't think I was taking a huge risk. I'd bought a really good bike. I had really good brakes on my bike. But it was this contrast between going up that hill, which was tough, and then the contrast of coming down the other side, which was something that I kind of hold on to today. You got to have, you know, the tough things in life, if you just stay present and do the next right thing, I've experienced you kind of work through that stuff. And on the other side of it is just a lot of beauty. I'm no longer a caregiver. The person I was caring for is gone. But what I learned on this trip allowed me to come back, take some of the skills I learned along the way about asking for help, listening to others. When I returned, I started caregiver groups. I spoke publicly. I got asked to testify by Senator Klobuchar to a group. Twin Cities Public Television came in and did a kind of a documentary. Like the newspaper started inquiring about this kind of emerging need to address caregivers. And you know what that did for me was it took some of the sting of this rotten Alzheimer's disease that robs the person of their thinking and of their being, and it made some good out of it. Something good could come out of that. Sounds a little nutty, but that's kind of the way it worked with me, was that I felt that Alzheimer's wasn't getting the final word here, that something good could come out of this. I just want to share one other, there's just tons of kind of metaphors and things that happened along the way that I could share with you. But the one that I kind of hold on to today was, in order to be a good caregiver, I had to take care of myself. In order to take care of myself, I needed help. I packed my bike up, mailed it back home, got in the airplane, the door closed, the flight attendant went through this thing of if the cabin pressure is lost and the mask come down, put your mask on first before you try to take care of someone else. And it was like, I've heard that many times, but it just took on a new meaning, and every time I hear it now, I go back to that just simple thing of take care of yourself first if you want to have anything left over to take care of someone else. You know, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't taken this bike trip, but I got reconciliation with my son out in Maine. I learned how to come back and be a good caregiver, and I did a good job at it. I did it as long as I could until it was no longer appropriate. I was not the best person for it. And, you know, life's been pretty good to me. And the beauty of it is, at my age, life isn't over yet. Living one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, I got a lot of time left. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity to share with you today. Thank you.